Snow came sideways over Prince William Sound, a white curtain blown hard across the water. At 12:01 on Friday, March 20th, 1908, the steamship Saratoga eased away from Valdez, her whistle low in the cold. She carried 78 officers and crew, 300 tons of copper ore and general merchandise, and a timetable that said Cordova by evening. Daylight held, but it was the kind that erases distances. Islands blurred into smudges, reef lines hid under chop. The wind had teeth. On the bridge, Captain L.J. Shaggy watched the snow thicken. He had the root in his bones. Down the Sound, in sight of the islands, then out toward Orca Inlet and the new railroad town that Copper was building. The Saratoga was an iron ship, 2 decks, 3 masts, built 30 years earlier in Pennsylvania and hardened by northern work. In normal weather, she was steady. Today, she shouldered into gusts that turned spray to ice. Southwest of Busby Island, the shoreline tucked and hooked, a place where a navigator counted minutes and bearings the way a miner counts his powder. The breeze had stiffened to something more, and the sea ran in low, heavy belts. Snow fell in thick ropes. Lookouts strained for the flash of a rock, for the dark lick of a kelp bed that meant bad bottom. Ahead lay the quiet water behind the island, then the cut toward Cordova. Between was a reef you did not meet by mistake. The Saratoga's bow swung a fraction. A bell rang. Engines answered and the deck trembled, one of those tiny corrections that saves a ship when visibility plays tricks. Then came the feel every sailor knows and never wants. A lift, a soft slide, then iron grating on hidden stone. The ship lurched. Copper ore knocked in the holds. A second scrape raked the keel and stopped them dead. Reverse. Shaggy's order punched into the engine room. Propeller wash beat froth along the hull. The Saratoga shivered but held fast. Anchor. Crew ran forward, wrestled the gear, and dropped iron into the Sound. Chain thundered through the hawse. They hove on the windlass to kedge the stern free. The snowstorm closed and opened like a stage curtain, showing them every mistake in pieces. The ship would not lift. In the cabins, men gathered sea bags and waited for the next sound. A crack, a shudder, the order they pretended not to hear. Down in the bilges, the pumps thumped to life. Leakage, yes, but not the rapid kind. She had taken the reef hard and high, and the sea worked at her with a patient hand. Signals went up, and the Saratoga sent for help. By mid-afternoon, a shape shouldered out of the snow, the steamer Elsie answering the call. She came in careful, nosing the lee of the stranded ship while the wind bullied both. Lines were passed, boats dropped and rose. In shifts, they ferried people off, the non-essential hands first, then the rest, until the decks of the Saratoga felt strangely empty. A working ship turned suddenly into a hulk. The storm hissed against the plates. Shog stayed on his bridge a little longer, counting the beat of the swell, willing the next heave to free the keel. It did not come. Night would have been worse, but daylight only exposed the fact. Prince William Sound had taken another one. At 2:28 p.m., the Saratoga lay fast at the southwest end of Busby Island, bleeding hours and hope. The anchors had been run. The engine reversed to the stops. The sea paid no attention. By evening, the decision was made. The Elsie steamed away, carrying the men who had woken that morning in Valdez and expected a routine run to Cordova. They looked back and saw their ship fixed at an angle in the whiteness, a black slash under the snow. Value and loss would be written later in careful numbers. $200,000 for the vessel, probably total. $7,000 in cargo, $5,000 of it gone to water and stone. Papers would list her measurements: 298 feet long, 38 and a half on the beam, 23 and a half in depth, like a coroner writing down height and weight. Port Townsend remained her registry. Seattle her master's home. Alaska Steamship Company her owner. None of those lines could tell what it felt like on the bridge when the bow lifted and scraped and the sound pronounced its verdict. In the days that followed, weather pulled at the Saratoga, twisted her frames, and worried open seams. Salvage was discussed. Men came out in smaller craft and walked her when the tide fell. They laid plans, talked of kedging, of lightning, of waiting for a broader window of calm. The Sound had its own plan. Seasons would pass and pieces would go. A year later, a schooner called Olga would be lost while trying to work the wreck, another name added to the Sound's accounting. Prince William Sound remembers in layers. 2 years after the Saratoga, the steamship Olympia would wreck on nearby Bly Reef, iron on stone, a headline for its day. Decades after that, the tanker Exxon Valdez would fetch up hard in almost the same place and pour oil into winter water until the calendar stopped meaning much. Stand on a cliff above Busby Island on a snow day and you can hear it. Not the news stories, but the sea making each disaster rhyme with the last. For the men of the Saratoga, there was a different silence. They had done what mariners do when time runs out. Reversed engines, run anchors, rigged boats, handed one another across a gap that could have gone bad. Luck and proximity delivered the Elsie in time. The casualty lists, if any were kept, did not fill with names. The worst thing that happened that day was a ship becoming a place. And yet a ship is a promise, a schedule printed in newsprint, a hold full of ore bound to a new town, a paycheck in a galley coat. When the Saratoga stayed on the reef, those promises tore. Long after the snowstorm, divers remembered her like a rumor. In 1914, a Tacoma man, Walter McCrae, picked at the bones and lifted bronze by the ton, anchors and chain, and, like a final ledger entry, 64 tons of copper ore from her broken spaces. By then, the Sound had already moved on. Cordova grew. Valdez endured. The iron ship that tried to thread Busby Island on a bad day became soundings on a chart, and a caution passed from pilot to pilot. Give that corner room, because someone else didn't. What makes a wreck linger isn't always lives lost. Sometimes it's the way all the pieces line up. The hour noted in a logbook, 12:01 departure, set against the exact time of the grounding. The storm described as heavy snow, the plain language of the report, reversed engine, ran out anchor, tried to heave ship off. There's a humility in the words. They read like men who know that seamanship and luck are cousins, and on some afternoons, luck keeps its distance. March 20th, 1908 was one of those afternoons. Today, the chart still names Busby Island. The water around it continues to do what it always did: curl, cross, build, and sweep. Ferries and tugboats pass. The coast is quieter than it was when copper lit up headlines, but working boats still tuck behind the island when weather comes wrong. Somewhere under that gray water, the Saratoga's story is still there, less a relic than a contour. If you could scrape away the snow and the years, you might see her bow lifted just enough to catch a swell, the Sound waiting for her to breathe free, and the last of her crew turned toward the Elsie, backs to the wind, hoping not to be the very last aboard. Thank you for listening to The Sunken Ledger. Subscribe for more true stories from the depths.